Welcome to MLT 101, Human Anatomy. My name is H1 Barnes, and our lesson topic is cells and tissues. The cell is the basic structural unit of all life. Depending on how you want to think about viruses, that statement is debatable, but for all practical purposes, remains true. The human body consists of trillions of cells. They're responsible for everything that your body does. We have many different categories of cells. Each of those categories are specialized to perform a unique function. Your brain cells do different things than the cells in your intestines, which do different things than the cells on the surface of your skin. They all serve a purpose. No matter what their function, all cells are going to share some of the same basic structural components. If we look at a cell like a water balloon, we're going to first come to the plasma membrane. If I hold a water balloon in my hand, if I hold a cell in my hand, the balloon, the rubber it's made out of, the membrane, the structure that holds that cell together, is called the plasma membrane. It's the outer layer of a cell. It's going to enclose the cell, and it's going to regulate, control, through active and passive transport mechanisms, what is allowed to move in and out of the cell. On the surface of that plasma membrane, there are structures called microvilli. They're small projections on the cell. Think little wiggly wobbly fingers sticking off the side. What they do is they increase the surface area of that membrane in certain cells. By increasing the surface area, it allows more surface of that cell to be in contact with a larger volume of fluid or other material so that it can absorb things more readily. Inside the cell, the most prominent structure we're going to see is called the nucleus. It is a large organelle near the center of the cell composed of DNA and protein. It's often thought of as the command center of the cell. It's what contains your chromosomes and genetic material. When you look at it under a microscope, it's one of the things that's going to immediately stand out to you. When we stain a cell, and by stain I mean literally put a cell on a slide, dunk that slide in a series of different colored liquids, like dyes, to actually colorfully stain it so that we can see the different parts of the cell. Your nucleus is often going to be large, dark staining object in the middle of the cell. It'll stand out immediately most times. Then in the nucleus, the same way that you've got a nucleus inside your cell, you have something called a nucleolus inside the nucleus. It's a small body in the nucleus composed of RNA, DNA, and protein. What it does is it makes something called a ribosome, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. When you look at a nucleolus under a microscope, a lot of times it'll just look like a slightly lighter or darker colored smooth spot in the nucleus. Within the nucleus, we have our chromosomes, which are long strands of DNA organized into units referred as genes. These occur in 23 identical pairs for a total of 46 chromosomes in your standard template human being. They're going to govern all cell activities, including cellular reproduction. For a cell to divide, it has to make a copy of these chromosomes so that each functional cell has a full copy to carry out the tasks that it needs to do. There are some exceptions to this, but that is the general rule. What your cell is filled of. So if we think of the cell as a water balloon, what's the water? That fluid in the cell is called cytoplasm. It's the substance in your cell also known as cytosol, that holds the various organelles and inclusions. An inclusion is an object or something that has been brought into the cell, and it is the site of numerous cellular activities. So we've got our water balloon. It's filled with cytoplasm. But what's in the cell doing the things? Those are our organelles. The same way that your body has organs like heart and lungs and stomach, your cell has organelles. They are specialized structures that are floating around in your cytoplasm. Your centrioles are rod-shaped bodies that are close to the nucleus. They assist in the separation of your chromosomes during cell division. Cell division is when your cells divide, they split themselves in half, and one cell becomes two. That's how cells reproduce. Your centrioles make sure that each new cell gets a full set of chromosomes. Your endoplasmic reticulum is a network of smooth or rough tubular membranes. Your smooth endoplasmic reticulum works in lipid synthesis. To synthesize something is to make something. They help make lipids. Your rough endoplasmic reticulum plays a role in protein synthesis and management. Your Golgi, or your Golgi apparatus, is several layers of membranes, and they make, sort, and prepare protein compounds for transport. Your lysosomes, that's one of the terms from our medical terminology lecture, lysis, lysosomes, are small sacs of digestive enzymes that are used to break apart, to break down substances that are within the cell. They're used to digest the things that your cell brings within itself. Peroxisomes are an enzyme-containing organelle that is used to destroy harmful substances that make their way into the cell. Mitochondria, everyone should be familiar with the powerhouse of the cell, is an oval or rod-shaped organelle that is used to produce energy. It is the powerhouse of the cell. It's like the power station that keeps the lights on, that keeps everything else going. Your ribosomes, that we mentioned earlier, are tiny bodies that are going to exist either singularly or in clusters, or they will be attached to your endoplasmic reticulum. They play a role in assembling proteins from amino acids. And because our rough endoplasmic reticulum is the one involved in protein synthesis, when I look for ribosomes in a picture, I'm going to look for my rough endoplasmic reticulum. Look for little dots on it. Vesicles are small, pouched inclusions in your plasma membrane. They store substances, they move them in or out of the cell. An easy way to think of what a vesicle is if my cell is like a water balloon, imagine that I've got another tiny water balloon inside the other big major water balloon that we've got. That tiny water balloon, I stick it to the side of the first water balloon and it just sits there, stuck to the wall of that water balloon. That's my vesicle. Next, we have surface organelles. These are found on the outside of your plasma membrane, on the outside of your cell. They're structures that project from certain cells, and they're used to move the cell or to move fluids around the cell. We have cilia, which are small hair-like projections. They move in a waving motion, and they're used to move fluid around the outside of your cell. Then we have the flagellum. It is a whip-like extension, and in human cells, it's found on sperm. It's used to propel sperm forward. Moving on to tissues. A tissue is a group of similar cells that are working together to perform a specific function. We have 4 basic types of normal tissue. There's connective tissue. That's the tissue that supports and connects the parts of your body together. It includes adipose, which is your fat tissue, cartilage, which is that semi-solid tissue. It's not as solid as bone. It's not as flexible as everything else. It's what makes up your nose and your ears. You've got bones and blood. If you've ever performed a dissection or an autopsy, you'll also see a tissue that looks almost like a spider web, a very fine spider web whenever you separate a muscle from another muscle or from fat tissue. That is also an example of connective tissue. Your epithelial tissues, that's our next category, are the tissue that covers and protects the body and lines your organs, vessels, and cavities. Whenever you look at the surface of a thing that's part of the body, it's usually epithelial cells that are on the outside that you're looking at. Muscle tissue is the tissue that contracts to produce movement. You have 3 different types that we'll be going over soon. And nerve tissue, which has the ability to transmit electrical and chemical impulses throughout the body.